Hi everyone. Welcome to English Story School. Have you ever asked yourself, what if today was my last chance? What if I'm not living to my fullest potential? It's a question that cuts deep. A question that we avoid, not because we don't have the answers, but because we're afraid of what might come next. We're afraid of what we might realize, the truth that we're holding ourselves back. Part 1, The Awakening. Let me tell you a story. This is the story of Alex, a man just like you, full of dreams and aspirations, but chained by the daily grind, by comfort, by fear. Alex wasn't always the man you see today. In fact, for most of his life, he played it safe. He woke up every morning to a routine that was so predictable, it could have been written down in a book somewhere. He didn't mind it at first. It was comfortable. It was easy. But there was a quiet, nagging feeling inside him that whispered, "Is this all there is?" One morning, Alex woke up just like he did every day. The alarm buzzed at the usual time, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone to turn it off. He sat up, stretched, and began the motions that had become so ingrained in him. His routine was the same, his coffee was the same, the view from his window was the same. Everything in his life was the same. He didn't even have to think about it. It was autopilot. And for a long time, that was enough. But that morning, something inside him shifted, like a gear suddenly clicking into place. He walked into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. He looked at himself, really looked. His reflection was so familiar, yet something felt different about it today. The face staring back at him was still his, but his eyes, there was something in them that hadn't been there before. A flicker of awareness of something bigger than the man he had become. What was it? Then it hit him, as if the universe had whispered it into his ear. What if today was my last chance? The words seemed to ring through his mind, louder than the alarm that had woken him up just hours before. He felt his heart race, his breath quicken. For the first time in a long time, he had stopped and asked himself something real, something important. Alex had spent so many years living in the comfort zone, not realizing that it was the very thing that was slowly suffocating him. He had built walls around himself, walls of routine, of safety, of expectations. He had always feared the unknown, avoided risk, and stayed within the confines of what others expected of him. It's easier this way, he'd tell himself. There's no reason to rock the boat. But deep inside, there was a fire burning, a fire that wanted to break free, to experience more, to take risks, to live fully. That fire had always been there, waiting. But Alex had been too afraid to let it out. It wasn't just about fear of failure. It was about fear of the unknown, of what might happen if he dared to step outside the life he had built. What if it didn't work? What if he failed? What if the world saw him for who he truly was? A man who didn't have it all together, who didn't know the answers, who might fall flat on his face. The fear of the unknown had kept him stuck in this loop for years. But that morning, standing in front of the mirror, something broke. A shift occurred inside him. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Alex realized that he had been living in fear for far too long. He had been afraid of failure. But more than that, he had been afraid of missing out on his own potential, afraid of letting his life slip by without ever truly living. And that fear, that was the greatest risk of all. Alex closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. What if I let go of the fear? What if I stepped into the unknown? What would that feel like? In that moment, a new clarity washed over him. Live bold, die hard, there are no second chances. The words echoed in his mind, reverberating through every part of him. He had heard those words before, but today they felt different. They felt real. They felt like a challenge, a call to arms, a declaration of independence from the life he had been living. He wasn't just going to exist anymore. He was going to live boldly, live fearlessly, and live without regret. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. Life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It was about creating the perfect moment. He wasn't going to let another day pass by without taking that leap. He wasn't going to let another opportunity slip through his fingers just because it was scary or uncertain. The time to change, to rise, to take that first bold step was now. The Alex who had woken up that morning, who had gone through the motions of his life, was no longer the same man. That version of him was gone. Today, the man who stood before the mirror was ready to embrace everything that was to come, ready to take risks, ready to feel the fear and do it anyway, ready to build a life that was bold, powerful, and unapologetic. And with that decision, a new chapter began. He wasn't waiting for permission. He wasn't asking for approval. He was simply stepping forward into the unknown, guided by the belief that it was better to try and fail than to never try at all. Alex's story wasn't going to be defined by fear anymore. It was going to be defined by action, by living every moment as if it were his last chance. There are no second chances, he whispered to himself, smiling at the reflection in the mirror. It's now or never. This was just the beginning. Part 2. The Bold Leap. It didn't take long for Alex to put his newfound realization into action. That morning, as he stood in front of the mirror, something inside him had snapped. A switch had flipped, and the quiet fire that had been smoldering deep within him finally ignited. There was no longer any question about what needed to be done. He couldn't go on living like this. The man staring back at him in the mirror, the one who had been quietly existing, wasn't the person he wanted to be. No, he had made a promise to himself, and now it was time to act on it. Alex had spent years in a job he had no passion for, no excitement about. It was safe, predictable, and yes, it paid the bills. But it hadn't given him joy. It hadn't sparked anything in his soul. The comfort zone had become a prison, and though the walls were invisible, they were suffocating him. He realized he was living a life on autopilot. He wasn't truly living, and if he stayed in that job, he'd never feel the thrill of being alive again. What do you fear most? Is it failure, or is it regret? A voice inside his head asked, as clear as day. He couldn't shake it. It echoed in his thoughts, louder and louder, like a drumbeat urging him to take action. Regret. That was the word that hit hardest. He feared waking up years from now, looking back and wondering what might have been if he had just taken the leap. Fear of failure didn't scare him nearly as much as the thought of being stuck in the same place forever. Without any backup plan, without knowing what was ahead, Alex made a choice. He quit his job. The decision didn't come easily. It was terrifying, yes, but exhilarating at the same time. As soon as he handed in his resignation, it felt like a weight had lifted from his chest. He wasn't bound by the expectations of others anymore. He wasn't defined by the career that had once been his safety net. Now he was free, but freedom, as Alex soon learned, didn't come without a price. He didn't have a clear path in front of him. He had no guarantees, no promises of success. But he did have one thing: faith in himself. He had come to believe that the only real failure in life was not trying at all. You have to take risks, he told himself. If you don't risk anything, you risk everything. The words rang in his mind as he made his first bold move. Alex decided to start a business from scratch. It was a big leap, one that felt impossible at times, but he knew it was the only way forward. This wasn't about a safety net. This wasn't about playing it safe. It was about truly living, about pursuing something that could ignite his soul. He didn't know what came next, but Alex knew this. He wasn't going to look back. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his choices any longer. He started researching, planning, reaching out to people who had done it before. He threw himself into the work with everything he had, even when the doubts crept in. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? But he quickly silenced those thoughts. Failure wasn't the enemy. The real enemy was not trying. The early days were brutal. There were nights when Alex doubted himself. He struggled to find clients. Money was tight, and there were moments when he questioned if he had made the right decision. But each hurdle only pushed him harder, fueled his determination. Every rejection, every setback became a lesson. He began to understand that growth came through pain, through pushing himself past his comfort zone. There were times when he felt utterly alone, when the weight of responsibility was too much and the world seemed to be against him. But Alex kept going, and that's when something incredible started happening. Slowly, but surely, things began to fall into place. Clients started trickling in. He gained the trust of a few key people, and as his reputation grew, so did his business. The first few months were hard. There were sleepless nights and endless hours of uncertainty. But as the days went on, Alex started to see the rewards of his courage. And every time he faced a challenge, he pushed through it, reminded by the mantra that had become his lifeline: if you don't risk anything, you risk everything. Each new step, each victory, no matter how small, gave him a deeper sense of purpose. It wasn't about the success, the clients, or the money. It was about becoming. Alex was no longer the man who was afraid to fail. He had stepped into something bigger than himself. The business was growing, but so was he. He was transforming, and he was doing it on his own terms. But it wasn't easy. There were days when he wanted to give up, when the weight of responsibility seemed unbearable. There were moments when everything felt like it was falling apart. But Alex knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Growth comes from discomfort. He reminded himself during those long nights when he felt like quitting. And sure enough, every challenge made him stronger. He realized that the true rewards of this journey weren't just found in financial success or accolades. They were found in the quiet moments of perseverance, in the strength he discovered in himself when he thought he had nothing left to give. Alex had learned something vital. It wasn't the success that mattered most, but the courage to keep going when everything around you says to stop. By the end of that first year, Alex had built a foundation, but more importantly, he had built character. His confidence was unshakable. He knew that the road ahead was filled with more obstacles, but he had become the kind of man who would face them head on. He had taken that first leap into the unknown, and now nothing could stop him. Part 3. The Storm. The real test came when the storm hit. When Alex first ventured into the world of entrepreneurship, the excitement, the hope, and the belief in his vision burned bright. The early days have been filled with action and optimism, but like all things in life, nothing worth achieving comes without its challenges. The truth Alex quickly discovered was that starting something new wasn't just about the excitement of beginning. It was about surviving the trials that would come along the way. And when those trials hit, they hit hard. At first, the business started slow, just as Alex had expected. But then, just when he thought he was getting a grip on things, disaster struck. It wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of forces working against him. Unexpected expenses drained his resources faster than he could replenish them. Partnerships that had seemed promising fell apart without warning, leaving him scrambling for solutions. Clients who had promised big projects backed out, or worse, didn't deliver what they had promised. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Alex had hit rock bottom. There were nights when the weight of everything pressed on him so heavily it was hard to breathe. One evening, after another disappointment had hit, he found himself alone in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. The silence was deafening. The screen in front of him seemed to mock him with its blankness. His mind was racing with thoughts of failure, of lost time, and wasted effort. The dream that had once felt so vibrant, so full of promise, now seemed like a distant memory. It was hard to believe in it anymore. The thought of quitting, of walking away from everything, began to whisper in his ear. The fear of failure crept in. It was subtle at first, like a shadow, just at the corner of his thoughts. But soon it grew louder, threatening to take over, drowning out the voices of reason, of hope, of courage. What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I've already failed? These thoughts circled relentlessly, like vultures. The voices were convincing, and they felt like the truth. He had invested so much time, so much effort, and now everything was crumbling. The failure that he had once feared was now staring him in the face, and it seemed so much bigger than him. But in that moment of overwhelming darkness, something clicked. A memory came rushing back to him. An old quote that had once inspired him: "You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying there." It was a simple truth, but in that moment, it felt like a revelation. It wasn't the fall that mattered. It was how you responded when you hit the ground. The storm was never going to stop. There would always be challenges, always be obstacles. What mattered was what you did after the storm. Alex sat back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment to gather his thoughts. He could stay down. He could let fear win. He could walk away and tell himself that he had tried, that the dream wasn't meant to be. Or he could do something that no one expected, including himself. He could rise. He could fight. He could keep moving forward no matter how hard it got. The choice was his. And in that moment, Alex made a decision. He wasn't going to let this storm define him. He wasn't going to drown in it. So Alex dug deep. He reminded himself of why he had started this journey in the first place. The fire in his belly, the belief that he could create something meaningful. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his future. He wasn't going to let failure be his end. He got up, took a deep breath, and got back to work. But this time, things were different. Alex reached out to new people. He formed new partnerships, ones that had the potential to not only help his business survive, but to make it stronger. He threw himself into his work with an unshakable belief that failure was never an option. He had already fallen, but now he was rising. He wasn't just rebuilding his business. He was rebuilding his mindset. The storm didn't end immediately. In fact, it continued to challenge him. But Alex was different now. He was stronger, more resilient. With each setback, he learned more about himself, more about what it took to succeed, and more about the power of perseverance. Slowly, things began to turn around. Clients started coming back. His new partnerships flourished. The strength of the foundation he had built in the storm began to shine through. It wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. And soon enough, the storm began to pass. By the time it was over, Alex had weathered the worst of it. He had not only survived, he had grown. He had come out of the storm stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. He knew that storms would come again, and that the road ahead would never be smooth. But now he was ready. He had faced the darkest moments of his journey, and he had risen from them. He had learned that challenges weren't meant to break you. They were meant to forge you, to make you stronger than you ever thought possible. Alex had become something different. He was no longer the man who feared failure. He was the man who had learned to embrace it, to learn from it, and to rise above it. The storm had passed, but Alex knew one thing for certain. The next time it came, he would be ready. Because, in the end, the storm didn't define him. His response to it did. Part 4. The Breakthrough. Months later, after facing every challenge imaginable, Alex stood at the pinnacle of a journey he hadn't even dared to imagine at the start. The business, once a fragile hope barely clinging to life, had not only survived, it had thrived. Alex had crossed the threshold of his fears and emerged on the other side stronger, more capable, and more alive than ever before. The storm he had battled through had not broken him. It had shaped him into something greater. He wasn't just a man who took risks anymore. He had become a symbol of resilience. His name, once whispered in uncertainty, was now spoken with respect. People started taking notice. They weren't just admiring his success, they were inspired by it. It wasn't easy. It never had been. But what Alex had learned through every trial, every failure, every victory, was that the only way to truly live was to live boldly, to refuse to back down when the odds were stacked against you. And now, he stood as proof of that very truth. One quiet afternoon, Alex sat in his office. The day had been long, the workload overwhelming, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel exhausted in the usual way. He felt content, fulfilled in a way that was deeper than just business success. As he stared out the window, letting the weight of the past months wash over him, it hit him, a truth so profound that it stopped him in his tracks. I'm not just living for me anymore, he thought, the words echoing in his mind. I'm living for every person who has ever doubted themselves, for everyone who has been too afraid to take that first step. In that moment, Alex realized that his journey wasn't just about building a business. It was about building a legacy, something far more enduring than financial success or professional accolades. This was about inspiring others to believe in themselves, to take risks, to break free from the chains that held them back. His life, his story, was now bigger than him. It had the power to spark a fire in others, to remind them that they too could take that leap, no matter how impossible it seemed. The weight of that realization hit him like a wave, and with it came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He wasn't just building a company. He was building something that would live on long after the office lights dimmed. His legacy wasn't about wealth. It was about courage. It was about hard work. It was about faith, the unwavering belief that the impossible was just a challenge waiting to be overcome. Alex had spent years stuck in the safety of predictability, paralyzed by fear and the comfort of the known. But now he understood something vital. He had done the impossible, not because he had more than others, but because he had chosen to keep moving forward, to keep taking that next step when it felt too hard. The breakthrough wasn't just the success of his business. It was the realization that true success wasn't just about getting to the top. It was about the transformation that took place along the way. If you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done, he had once read. Those words had stuck with him, but now they felt like the truest thing he had ever heard. He had embraced that truth. And it was that embrace, that unwavering belief, that had carried him to this point. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He wasn't just floating along, hoping that things would get better. He was living, truly living. For the first time in his life, Alex felt a deep sense of peace. He had reached a place where the fear of failure no longer loomed large. He knew that failure wasn't something to fear. It was something to learn from, something to grow through. I've lived through the storm, and now I stand on the other side. Alex thought, his heart swelling with pride. I'm not just existing anymore. I'm living a life of purpose, a life of meaning, and I'm doing it on my own terms. But even more than that, Alex knew that his journey wasn't just about what he had built. It was about the people he would continue to inspire. The business wasn't just his. It belonged to anyone who had ever dared to dream. It was a testament to the power of boldness, to the power of taking that first step when the path was unclear, to the belief that the only thing holding us back was the fear of moving forward. The breakthroughs weren't just external. They were internal. Alex had broken free from the limitations he had placed on himself. He had learned that living boldly wasn't just about the big leaps. It was about the small moments of courage every single day. And those moments, accumulated over time, became a life worth living. As the days passed, Alex's reputation grew. He became not just a business owner, but a mentor, a guide for others who were ready to take their own bold steps. He spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and shared his story with anyone who would listen. Living boldly, he would say, isn't about being fearless. It's about being willing to step forward in the face of fear. It's about knowing that every challenge is an opportunity to become stronger. And with each person who reached out, each person who thanked him for his courage, Alex realized that the breakthrough was never just about him. It was about everyone who needed the reminder that they could break free from the chains of their own fear and live a life of purpose, of impact, of meaning. With every new breakthrough, Alex's vision expanded. He understood now that the business he had started was never just about profits. It was about igniting a movement, a revolution of boldness. He wasn't just making money, he was making change. And that change, his legacy, was what mattered most. Part 5, The Legacy. As the years passed, Alex became more than just a successful entrepreneur. He was no longer simply known for the business he had built. He had evolved into something much bigger. He had become a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of resilience, and a guide for others who were willing to take the same bold leap that had once seemed impossible. The man who had started with nothing but a dream and a relentless will to succeed was now standing tall as a mentor to countless others, showing them that their own potential was far greater than they had ever imagined. Alex didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. He traveled the world, speaking at conferences, workshops, and seminars, sharing his story with anyone who would listen. The message was always the same: live bold, die hard. There are no second chances. He had discovered, through blood, sweat, and tears, that the only true failure in life wasn't losing. It was not trying at all. And now, it was his mission to make sure that others understood this same truth. In his speeches, Alex shared the raw, unfiltered journey that had led him to where he was. He spoke of the sleepless nights, the struggles, the moments when everything seemed to be falling apart. He spoke of the moments when he felt like giving up and how he pushed through them. He spoke of the storm that almost broke him and how, instead, it had shaped him into the man he had become. But most importantly, he spoke about the one thing that made everything worth it, the realization that living boldly, without regret, was the key to a life truly lived. One day, Alex stood before an audience once again, much like the one from that health fair all those years ago. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, some young, some older, but all eager to hear what he had to say. This time, however, Alex wasn't just speaking to them. He was speaking from his heart, from everything he had learned over the years, everything that had brought him to this point. The room was quiet, waiting for his words. And Alex, standing before the crowd, took a deep breath. "You know," he began, his voice calm but filled with conviction, "there was a time when I thought life was about playing it safe. I thought that comfort and security were the goals. But I learned the hard way that the only way to truly live is to live boldly, to take risks, to step into the unknown even when it scares you, to be unapologetic about your dreams, no matter how big they seem." He paused, allowing the words to settle in. He could see the change in the room, the way people were leaning forward, listening with rapt attention. Alex had their undivided focus. He was no longer just a speaker. He was someone who had lived through it all, the struggles, the failures, the victories, and he was here to pass on that wisdom. "You see," Alex continued, "the real test in life isn't how you handle success. It's how you rise after the storm, after everything falls apart. And let me tell you, it will fall apart. It will. But that doesn't mean you give up. That doesn't mean you quit. Because the only true failure in life is not trying. It's letting fear control you. It's staying stuck in the comfort zone, convincing yourself that you can't make a change, that you can't take that leap. The audience was silent, but you could feel the energy building, as if the room itself was awakening to something bigger than just words. Alex smiled, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, knowing that they were with him, that they were ready to hear the final truth that he had learned. Live bold, die hard. There are no second chances. These aren't just words. They're the foundation of everything I've built. They're the fuel that got me through the darkest days. They are the truth that will carry you through your toughest challenges. If you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done. It's that simple. Alex's voice softened, but it carried with the weight of years of hard-earned wisdom. It's never too late to become stronger than yesterday, he said, his voice rich with emotion. The time to rise is now. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it may never come. Take the leap today. Make the decision to live without regret, to live without fear. And no matter how hard it gets, keep moving forward. That's the secret. That's the key. As he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, others with their hands raised in quiet affirmation. They had heard his story, felt his pain, and now they were ready to embrace his message. Alex's journey had not only changed his life, it had inspired others to take their own bold steps toward greatness. For Alex, this moment wasn't just about him. It was about them, the people who were ready to take that first leap, to challenge their own fears, and to live the life they were meant to live. This was his legacy. And with each person who walked away from his talk, Alex knew that the impact of his journey would continue. His story, his message, would live on in the hearts of those who had found the courage to believe in themselves. And as the applause continued to echo through the room, Alex realized that this wasn't just a moment. It was the beginning of a movement of boldness, of courage, and of living life without apology. He stood there, in the midst of it all, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything that had brought him to this moment. He had lived fully, unapologetically, and without fear. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.